Once upon a time on a console generation long past, innovation and experimentation were still on full blast. The status quo had yet to be set, so let's make something mad, a Japanese developer said. Budget, development time, worries these were not. And so something mad is exactly what we got.
Ah, fucking hell. Jesus Christ. Shadow of Destiny is a story-driven linear adventure game featuring protagonist Ike Kush, who's on a time-traveling quest as he tries to find out who's behind his very own murder. All of which takes place in a small German town called Lebensbaum.
And I fuck with this town.
See, Shadow of Memsony is one of those the town is a character types of games. As you travel beyond space and time, you'll not only see many incarnations of Lebensbaum itself and its inhabitants, but you're also able to influence these by generally being a massive asshole. I mean, I couldn't give less of a fuck about which time travel law you subscribe to, and neither does the game, mostly because they're all bullshit anyway, and the writers probably just wanted to create a fun and interesting mystery. Though it was also a good excuse for Konami to flex its now newly found cutscene boner, along with everyone fucking else at the time, so most of the game sees you walking in between story sequences, and while you're doing that, you can have a cheeky peeky inside of the town's various nooks and crannies, as Lebensbaum is a bona fide sandbox. Not one that's necessarily very big or rich with detail or anything, but it is how the city itself impacts the story that makes things interesting. If there's one thing that hits you right in the non-gender specific dick right away, it is the downright bizarre fucking atmosphere. You see, unlike a well-made open-world game, this one doesn't feel alive at all. In fact, it feels eerily empty.
Excuse me, have you seen a man walking around here?
Just knowing that there's a serial killer out there somewhere aimlessly roaming these deserted streets just like you are, and whenever you do find anyone, you can be sure that they're weirder than a David Lynch fever dream. Not sure how on purpose any of this is considering the game's developer and its release date, but given the accompanying music, I think that they definitely intended for things to be a bit odd. Even when, somehow, despite all odds, the time of day and architecture collide to make something that's legitimately quite pretty from an artistic standpoint, there's still this strong sense of eeriness drooling all over the badly textured scenery. The lighting especially is pretty cool in that sense, as due to the render distance, things tend to softly fade in with a darkish tone. Well, if you're playing on the PS2 version at least. It's what I played initially, but my capture card was like, no! So I used the PC version, which has a much higher resolution, but whatever technique that is used for the shadow, lighting, and fog rendering is a little bit different. Yeah, the PS2 was notoriously quite good at atmospheric contrasts and thick-looking transparent textures, which is also why the Silent Hill series pretty much thrived and died on that very system. Either way though, it's still an oddly visual appealing effect that mixes very well with the old grimy signs and the gloomy yet cozily lit windows and storefronts. It's all clearly just a bunch of textures, of course, but the color palettes and foggy bloom make it work. As long as you don't stand too close to the walls, at least. The Middle Ages were a fucked up time. Knowing that the town square of my city, for instance, used to have a guillotine right at the center and also tons and tons of aristocratic corpses underneath it kinda adds a bit of a flavor. So, Ike traveling back to that very same time period and learning about the sketchy alchemists that haunted Lebensbaum and the fires, the crazy doped-up artists, and the dress cage has a similar effect. What's really cool about this as well is how each time period has its own unique color scheme and aesthetical details. I mean, having the 1930s be in black and white is one thing, but making the deliberate effort to have it be caked in snow entirely, now that's a whole different story. And the same goes for the moody, hazy mornings found in the 1970s or the grimy darkness of medieval times. It's pretty cool. And like I said, the lore implications are neat too. Stuff like seeing the movie posters from an esteemed director in the present and then meeting him in the past, or even bumping into his forefathers who were painting and photographing way back when, it legitimately adds a lot. Like, literally all plot central buildings and people have their pastime counterparts, and certain buildings, like the museum for instance, end up being incredibly well detailed in that sense. Chronicling its entire origin, founding, and all of its previous owners and so on. It's not particularly exciting, I will admit, but then I've never said that the game was. In fact, it being kinda dull is a big part of its possibly unintentional charm, and I do also admire the effort that was put into shit like this regardless. I mean, I'm not much of a lore whore at all, but I can get behind some thick-ass world building when I see it, and I see fuckloads of it here. Mainly that of the it impacts the gameplay as well variety, as the game also allows you to influence the town's history quite heavily, letting you turn the museum into a library for example, or even preventing the big tree on the town square from being planted and requesting a fountain of some sort instead.
Interiors!
I talk about those a lot. My Final Fantasy XII review had an entire paragraph dedicated just to the insides of stores, and just about every one of my videos has at least some level of wanking over an arbitrary detail, reminding me of some other games with interiors what I liked. And Shadow of the series has no shortage of funky buildings for you to explore, and by that I mean that they have like 6 or some shit, only 2 of which having more than one room.
But this museum though, family, goddamn.
The moment you step inside, they hit you with those classic PS1 camera angles that make it play like absolute horseshit, but also give it some thick whiffs of Resident Evil atmosphere. The empty rooms with the single color walls and the old-timey furniture all caked in lower grade 3D models, that is of the caliber used in the CG snapshots meant for pre-rendered backgrounds, have really developed into their own aesthetic in a way. I mean, I know that this is modeled after what classic European mansions used to look like, but these areas being made by Japanese people maybe not entirely familiar with the style is what sets it apart. You know, games like D, Trace Memories, RE1, and so on. In any case, with this museum being a museum, it'll have some painting-ass paintings and artwork-ass artwork, and what's cool about these is that they actually include neat little details about the town's history, and by extension, also about Ike because of his meddling. Your actions, limited as they may be, can influence some of the works here, or alternatively, they could also already be alluding to something that'll happen way later in the game that required your involvement what you don't even know about yet. And the same goes for the souvenir shop, which contains puzzle items that you may have or are going to use in the past, and the posters around town portraying movies inspired by things what you did as well.
That mask was made for the city festival. It's about 100 years old.
These are all optional, missable environmental things, but I still totally dig that they're there, as it shows that the devs actually gave a shit and also hopefully make the player feel more involved once they do see it. So, yeah, it's a very silly, janky, and kind of a slow, poorly placed mess at times, but I do still love his ever-living guts. And the town of Lebensbaum certainly stands out as its most interesting feature to me. I mean, like, apart from everything I just went through, it's also just not a setting you see very often. Mostly because German towns aren't exactly known for being exciting, but that boring mundanity fits the game really well. And I guess it balances out the abject weirdness otherwise blasting on full unrelenting force. It just feels fresh, I guess. Different, despite being a game from 2001 that looks like fucking Garbo. Though, to its credit, any game where you can straight up have a live fucking cat in your inventory is pretty much okay in my book. By the way, if you managed to watch the whole thing, give me some pointers if you thought that anything stood out. I really like the idea of this series, but I'm still unsure about the format, and it also hasn't exactly performed very well in the past either, so let me know if you have any idea of how I could improve this, or if it's even worth continuing at all.
Thank you for watching. I love you. Goodbye.